Well, I think I speak for both of us when I say we're very jazzed about the talk that we're about to have. I just want to set the stage for a minute as to why we're talking about sports today. So, as Emma mentioned, my background as a journalist is in writing about women's quality. I have done that through many lenses, from wellness to STEM to entrepreneurship. And that can be a very frustrating job. We all live the gender gap, and it's very yeah, difficult sometimes to write about how tough it is for women. And there are these real rays of light and these moments where we get these incredible role models and we think we're seeing this progress happen and it's great. But I'm always obsessed with this question of like, what is really shaping women's power and influence in the world? What are the tools we have to really tangibly change people's hearts and minds about what women are capable of and really get the world and society to see all the incredible things that women are doing and recognize that and pay them fairly. So I came to sports not as a sports fan. I'm really excited to be talking about this book in this room in particular because I actually think it's not a book about sports. It's a book about advancing women. So I was a senior editor at Glamour back in 2019, and I was assigned to cover the US women's national team on their road to the World Cup. Which, if you'll remember, they were in a very public lawsuit with their employer, US Soccer, over pay discrimination. And they had really built this movement. There was this fire ignited in so many women I knew who were not sports fans at all, certainly women who were sports fans, where we all kind of had this recognition of like, this looks familiar. We know what it feels like to show up in our workplaces and feel like we're being undervalued. So the more I started talking to these athletes and learning more about the history of the fight, not just in soccer, but the fight in sports more broadly among women athletes, something really clicked in my mind. And I thought, this is it. This is one of the most powerful tools we have for shaping ideas about women's bodies, what women are capable of, what women are worth. Sports is this rare industry where we get a lot of information about what women are paid. That's public. We get to talk about it and discuss it. So resulting from that is the book that I wrote. And I'm so excited to be sitting here with Coach Washington today because, I mean, you have this incredible resume, but you have lived this as an athlete, as an advocate with the WNBA Players Association. I know we're going to talk about that, and as a coach as well. So I'll stop fangirling and I'll let you introduce yourself.
I don't have quite the story. My journey in sports really started as a little girl wanting to beat the boys in my neighborhood, and along the way kept playing sports and basketball in particular, and was fortunate enough to become a professional, graduate from college to become a professional right at the time when the WNBA was starting and professional leagues were starting, because I didn't grow up thinking that I would be um, a coach or a professional athlete or anything. I grew up and went to college utilizing basketball as a way to pay for college. And then I would go do something with my life after that. And there was this just wonderful, for me and women of my age and at that time, a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to continue into professional sports with the WNBA starting. And so my professional journey, being a professional athlete, being a college coach, really was an accident, a wonderful accident, but it's been an amazing ride. And so I'm excited to be here to share with you and talk about some of the inflection points during my journey in basketball and my journey in sports.
Amazing. Well, I want to start with this idea of sports as a leadership pipeline. So one of the, I think, most shocking and revelatory things I learned when reporting for the book is this stat that 94% of all female C-suite executives have a youth sports background. So either played high school or college sports, 94%. Like, that is not a coincidence. It's huge. So we can talk about some of the theoretical reasons as to why that is, but I want to hear from you first about your personal experience with that. What are some of the most impactful lessons and experiences that you had in your career as an athlete that shaped, your path now as a leader?
Yeah, I think two things really stand out for me in that space. Number one is resilience. So in sports, there's a resiliency that you have to have because every day you're dealing with failure. Every day you go to practice, you get scored on, you turn the ball over, like you're dealing with failure every single day. And there's a resilience that you have to come back the next day. You lose a big game, you have to come back the next day and get back at it. So there's this resilience that you learn and you develop, and um, the failures or the things that don't quite go as well as you anticipated or as well as you wanted, you have to find a way to put that behind you. And I think the second element is being solution driven. So you deal with that failure, and then you have to find the solutions necessary to come back and be better. You look at the WNBA finals and game one, New York Liberty lose a heartbreaker at home. And they have to come back in the practice gym and they have to be resilient, right? But they also have to be solution driven. What went well? What went wrong? What adjustments do we need to make? And I think those skills, and they are skills, those skills serve us well outside of the realm of sports.
Yeah.
So when you get in these leadership positions, you're ready to deal with, okay, we didn't get our sales numbers, so what's the solution? Or we didn't, even in coaching, we didn't land the recruit that we wanted. So how do we recoup and regroup and find solutions to being better? And I think those two skills really serve women well in leadership positions and generally in business.
That's one of the things I love so much about sports as a tool for women too, is like you don't have to have played. You can watch. Like I get to speak to so many athletes for my job, which is amazing. And one of my favorite questions to ask them about is these failure moments, which they don't always love when I do. But like I'm so fascinated in that of, we watch these women literally fail on the highest stage in public in front of an audience of tens of thousands, potentially millions on a broadcast audience. And they have to still show up the next day and do the work. And that has really helped me so much in my career, just as a fan now watching and thinking, okay, if they can do that, like whatever thing didn't go my way yesterday, that is no big deal.
Right. You find the solutions that you need. And, there's another thing of getting over yourself, right? You got to get over yourself. Like you got to get over this moment and move forward. And it's something that, it's a skill. Once you learn it, you can apply it to everything, you know. My husband did not take out the garbage, right? So let me find a solution to get him to want to take out the garbage, right? So that's pretty cool. All right, I got one for you. Um, so you write a lot about athletes, as you said. How have you used the insight and experiences from women athletes to transform their businesses? What does that look like?
Yeah, so this leadership stat comes from a study that Ernst and Young did. This is, I think this was back in 2014 now. And they were prepping for the Rio Olympics. They were one of the official partners of the Olympics in 2016. So they were, trying to drum up some data and interest around people in sports. So I spoke to the woman who led that research, Nancy Altobello, who at the time was their vice global chair of talent. And she's a former athlete herself. And she said, internally on the team, we commissioned this whole survey and we're expecting the biggest common denominator for all the women in leadership positions and C-suite positions across the country to be business school, to be, an Ivy League degree. And they were shocked to find that it was a youth sports background was the single biggest commonality between these women. And the way she talked about it, she said we had this moment of being shocked, and then we thought, oh, duh. Obviously, because of all the reasons you just described, the people on her team that had sports experience were like, of course, it teaches resilience and it's a safe place to fail and teaches you all these incredible coping skills that translate to the workplace. So the first step that they did was they started hiring a bunch of athletes. As the global chair of talent, she had the power to make that mandate and say we really need to be looking for that on a resume. And then they actually ended up changing their entire performance management system. So once they got some of those athletes in, they'd even hired some Olympians who had just retired after Rio. And the feedback they got from them was, hang on a second, you're going to give me feedback in January for something I did last July. Like, how am I supposed to improve? Like, athletes operate in this ecosystem of intensely, obsessively tracked performance metrics and immediate feedback so that you can always be improving. I'm sure that's exactly what you do as a coach, and it was sort of mind-blowing to these athletes to get into the corporate world and think, wait a minute, how am I supposed to improve and how can I get feedback on my job performance? So they ended up actually changing the entire performance management system of this, multi-million-dollar company and made it a lot more agile so that employees could get that feedback. So I think there's all these, really interesting little examples like that we see of what actual corporations and businesses are taking from the sports world and from athletes and how that can revolutionize their practices. So I know that we are both firm believers that women athletes have long been leading the way for all of us when it comes to gender equality, closing the pay gap. Obviously, that's a really big one that tends to make a lot of headlines. But gender equality more broadly in terms of better working conditions, social justice issues. We've seen the WNBA really leading on that in the last 4 or 5 years. You lived this as the first president of the WNBA Players Association. And I want to talk about that because this is in the news again, as the current WNBA players have just opted out of their current contract and will be renegotiating after the 2025 season. Can you remind us what the landscape was like when you negotiated that very first contract for the players in the WNBA?
Absolutely. So 25 years ago, when I was like 6, the WNBA was just starting, and I played my first 2 seasons with the New York Liberty. And when the league first started, it was we were everybody was just happy there was a league. So there was no union, there was no collective bargaining. Actually, the first year, the minimum salary was $5,000. So there was a handful of players that made more than that, but the vast majority of players earned $5,000. And then I think the second year that went up to $15,000. And after that second season, the players decided to unionize, and I was elected president of the Players Association. And I had the truly now wonderful experience of sitting across from David Stern and Adam Silver and all the other executives from the WNBA side. And, we were hashing out the conditions for the players in the WNBA. And there was a sense with the players that this was the time that in this league could really have some legs and have longevity. All the other women's professional basketball leagues that had started before, they had played a year or two, and then kind of fizzled out. But with the backing of the NBA, we kind of felt like, you know what, this thing could last. And so the main driver for us unionizing and organizing was to make sure that the league could sustain itself. And we felt the only way that this could happen is if this was treated as a full-time career. This is not, even though we're playing in the summer, this is not a side gig. This is not, something you do in your off season. This is your career. So we have to have working conditions that mirror any other career. So our focus was really on having a stable working situation. So we were arguing mostly for year-round health care, maternity leave, retirement benefits. Really wasn't about, and we wanted higher salaries, but it wasn't about making the most money. It was about creating an environment where, as women, we could take care of our families. We could take care of ourselves, and this was a full-time career path and full-time proposition. So we're literally sitting across from David Stern and Adam Silver, and we're arguing over hundreds of dollars. And as you negotiate, they would do stuff like say, well, if we don't get a deal done this week, we're going to cancel the draft. And the players would go, oh my God, they're going to cancel the draft. And we have to go, so what? Those are people trying to take our jobs. Let them cancel the draft. We'll be fine. We had to really stand firm on what was important. And the things that were important was setting the table so that being a professional women's basketball player in this country was a full-time proposition. So when we get to this point now, where they're able to now negotiate for truly having salaries that are representative of where the league is, it really makes us feel good, because now we set that foundation for this is going to be a professional league. This is going to be a full-time career path, and what they're doing now, that's played itself out over these past 25 years, that we've been able to see the WNBA stand and have legs, and also be an example for other professional leagues. So, the Women's Soccer League, we had a lot of conversations with them about how our negotiations went as they started their professional league. And so we've been pretty honored that we could be the example for creating the first collective bargaining agreement in professional women's sports history. And we've been able to be an example along that way.
And that's still the case. I spoke to so many athletes for my book about the WNBA currently, and so many people said the same thing. Like, the contract that they have now has been a model for other leagues. It was, at the time when it was ratified in 2020, it was considered the gold standard. And I think what was really interesting about this current contract too is when I spoke to the players about what went in to that negotiation, they said so many of the things that you're saying now about the very first agreement. This is about having a sustainable career and a sustainable league for women. But they also spoke about being able to think about this added layer of how can this be a model for women more broadly, not just women in sports. One of the things they talked about was negotiating for fertility benefits. That's something that most women in the American workplace do not have, but the women of the WNBA have it because they were so intentional going into those talks about women need this as support for their careers. And this league can be a model for how you do that financially that other industries can look to. Tell me about what that, when you negotiated that very first CBA, to what degree could you think about the broader impacts beyond sports? Is that something that was even on your mind at that point?
It wasn't in the forefront, but it certainly was in the background of our minds. And I'd say it wasn't in the forefront because, like I said, we were really trying to play catch up. We were really trying to play catch up with what was typically in employment contracts that we just didn't have, but it was in the back of our minds that as public faces, and fighting for these issues in public, that we thought we could be impactful in that way. Because you didn't then, and you still really don't, as you said earlier, you don't hear about these fights behind closed doors, except for in the realm of athletics. And so we did kind of know, like, we've got to stand firm. We can't crumble. We have to stand firm in the issues that are important to us. And I think that has carried itself forward in every negotiation since with the WNBA.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's see. I got another one for you. What did you learn about how players' unions can be a model for women in the workplace? So, women who don't play sports, what can they take from the way that the unions have worked for women's soccer, women's basketball? How can we play that out in the professional space?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because I did not go into this reporting process thinking I was going to be writing about labor unions, but I did a lot because they are such a central part of the sports landscape, and that there aren't always parallels between unions in sports and unions in other industries because they really are this central cultural part of sports and the way that athletes operate. But there's two things that I took from the experience of athletes that I think are really interesting for all of us, which is number one, like the level to which women in these players' unions have to go above and beyond in knowing the business is really, you know, it's sometimes in some ways unfortunate that they do have to like do this second job of becoming, almost professional negotiators in order to get fair treatment. But I think we can take a lot from that. Like I spoke to Nneka and Chinea Gwemeke, they're both on executive leadership in the current Players Association, both very involved in that last negotiation. And they're like, we're on Zooms at 3 a.m literally like running the numbers. If we're going to ask for a change in the contract, we need to be able to say, because the league side is inevitably going to come back to us and say, oh, we don't know if we can do that. We don't know if that'll make sense. We don't know if we can afford it. We need to be able to say, we ran the numbers and here's what it will cost, or, here's why you can't afford it. So really knowing the business inside and out. But I think the biggest thing is really just this sense of solidarity and togetherness. And, we see that happen in sports in such a powerful way, both in this kind of formal, organized way in unions, and then also just generally, I think, in the spirit of women's sports. Like what the WNBA has accomplished in the social justice arena. I mean, they have literally influenced elections. That happens because these women know that they're more powerful if they speak with one voice. And that doesn't mean that there's not a huge array of opinions and beliefs and feelings in that league, just, using that one league as an example. But they really have developed such a respect for each other and such an awareness that working together, the spirit of collective action, that is what gets things done. And we see that in the cross-league cooperation too. So I feel like there's all these opportunities in our own workplaces and in our own industries for more of that cross-team collaboration, creating spaces for women to get together informally and just share best practices, to share problems about what's happening in their specific org. I really walked away from so many of these conversations with athletes feeling like, yeah, there's something really powerful in that I don't think we necessarily give enough attention.
Let me ask you this too. How does that, you've talked to a lot of athletes, and that you see so much now with ownership. We've got WNBA players, former players who are now in ownership positions down in Atlanta, down in out in Seattle. Current players have started a new league in the off season. So there's this growth from participation now to being ownership. How do you think that where do you think that fits in, this model of women's empowerment and impact in the sports realm?
Yeah. I think that ownership is central. And that is another thing that really came out of the conversations that I was having with women and reporting for this book over several years. I had started thinking, obviously, women's leadership in sports is huge. There are so many parallels we can see, between um, women's leadership in sports and women's leadership in the workplace. Organizations that have more women in leadership positions perform better. There are just reams of data that support that in terms of profitability, in terms of return on investments, in terms of earlier exits for women founded startups. Um, what I didn't appreciate at the beginning was this idea of ownership, how that's different from leadership, why we need to push it a step further. Because I was talking to all of these women who were in executive positions across industries who had a sports background, and we're talking about, how much that helped them get their leadership positions. And they're all saying, like, yeah, but the real thing is ownership. Like, you have to literally own a piece of the pie in order to have real power, real longevity. So many of them were saying, like, that is one of the biggest tools we have for closing the pay gap is ownership. And that can be, it doesn't necessarily have to mean owning a team or owning your own business. It's owning stock, it's owning your name. Like, we're seeing such a robust conversation in sports around ownership of your name, image, and likeness, thanks to, these changes in the NCAA and what that means for athletes, what that means for how they're able to monetize their value and start building wealth and building equity in themselves, starting at such an early age. That's still a very new landscape, but I think we're already seeing some really interesting insights from that. There's already a pay gap in NIL deals, which is sad but not shocking. And I think, we get, again, sports kind of provides this very visible arena for us to see a lot of these things that are useful to women in all industries, but we get to see them in this very public way. Like, we get to see women become owners of teams and what that looks like and what the changes they're able to affect. Like, I spoke to Renee Montgomery, who is now part owner of the Atlanta Dream. And like, what an incredible arc her story is. This is the team in 2020 that became, very politically vocal. They helped unseat their former owner, who was a Trump supporting senator at the time. And she really, spoke about what it meant to be able to come into that position as a former player who understood better than anybody else what the needs of that team were, and to be able to actually bring that to life. But I think such a big piece of this, and again, why I think sports is so important, is the ability to see it. Like, she talked about, someone approached her and said, would you ever be considered, or would you ever want to be, consider owning a team? And her first reaction was like, what? Of course not. I can't own a team. Like, I don't know anybody like me who has owned a team. She was actually the first former player to become part of an ownership group. And it was her wife that said, why not you? Like, seriously, why not you? Tell me, give me a list of reasons. So I think, we can really learn so much from the sports industry in that way. We get to see it. We get to see it. And that changes our expectations for ourselves and for others. Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk about some current events that have just happened. So we talked a lot about the WNBA's contracts being really important. They have just opted out of their current contract. So what is this? Just in case I haven't stressed it enough, this contract was really seen as the gold standard when they signed it in 2020. And it was. It's very remarkable what they achieved with that contract. Now they're saying, yeah, it's not good enough. We can do better. We're opting out. So what did you think when you first heard that news?
I was not surprised, and that's one of the big things when you negotiate, the CBA in the first place is, when can we opt out? Because we know the market is going to change in 2, 3, 4 years. So we want to have the flexibility to be able to opt out and renegotiate. but it's great timing, and fortuitous that coming off the heels of the most successful season from a viewership standpoint, from a television viewership standpoint, from a ticket sales standpoint, from an attendance standpoint, coming off that season to be able to give them the league, give them notice that we are going to renegotiate, and we're renegotiating from a position of power. That's important, and kind of giving them the heads up that this is coming. And I think it's gonna be really, they're gonna be sitting in a very powerful seat to negotiate a greater percentage of sharing the revenue, and to get whatever other elements to their that are important to them. There's always some things underneath, but I know a bigger piece of the revenue stream is going to be critical, and yeah, ownership. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what comes down the pipe from this negotiation next year.
I think this is one of the things I love so much about talking about women's sports and getting to talk to women in sports is this relentlessness. Like there's this real relentlessness around never settling, always pushing for better. Um, I think that is inspirational in many ways. Like that's impacted me in my own career, even just in the timeline for me writing this book. There would be so many moments where you think, everybody faces setbacks in their careers, and there would be so many moments I would think like, oh, well, like what would Sue Bird do right now? Like probably push harder, like these you can't engage with these stories and see these women in their constant fight and drive and not feel, I think, inspired by that. Um, you have worked with some really incredible and relentless leaders in women's sports. Muffet McGraw, legendary coach of Notre Dame. I got to speak to her for the book as well. And what I wanted to talk to her most about was how she, at one point in her career, said publicly she's hiring only women. So tell me about that, because you were on her team.
Yeah. So, I was on Coach McGraw's staff both when we had men on our staff and when we had an all-female staff. Um, and it was really cool to be on the all-female staff. We had a lot of fun. Now, I will say this, that when I was on her staff with all females, it was all her former players and one really long-term assistant coach. So it was really like family. And Coach McGraw did that a lot. Most of the um, coaches that worked with her were her former players. And she always talked about giving her former players an opportunity to get into the profession. So she felt a strong sense of um, a need to continue the pipeline. So um, women like myself, who I never thought about coaching until she asked me, like, I got a position open. Why don't you come coach? And I was like, I don't want to be a coach. She's like, come on, just give it a shot. And she was really instrumental for a lot of her former players to consider um, coaching as a profession. And so when it was that staff of all women, it was a lot of her giving us the permission to be great, and her giving us permission to be to step into our own leadership role with authenticity. And not everybody had to look the same and act the same and speak the same. But she became really intentional over the years of um, if we want our profession to stay um, to continue to have women growing in our profession, we have to be intentional about providing opportunities. And that was the genesis of how she came to that position, that she just really wanted to give opportunities to women, because so many men were coming into women's basketball as coaches, as colleges and universities and even the professional leagues started putting more resources into it. more and more men wanted to become coaches, and she felt a very strong sense that, you know, women deserve a right to own our game. And so she was intentional about giving opportunities.
I think that's so important because, you know, to be clear, I don't think we should be moving towards a model where instead of all men in power, it's all women, because the point is diversity, right? Like the point is having a group of people with varied experiences, and that is what produces stronger results. But I do think that there is something really important and really powerful about these all women spaces. You know, we see the same thing in sports with the conversation around mixed gender competition. Like, yes, there's definitely a place for that. There's also definitely a place for, you know, women to, I don't know, learn and benefit from being with women. How do you think the dynamic changed on the team, you know, going from having men on the coaching staff to it ultimately being an all-female coaching staff? How did that change the environment?
Um, I'm not sure how much the environment changed for the players, but I definitely think the environment changed a little bit for the staff. Because I don't think we coach them any differently. I don't think there's the men coach this way. We coach them the same. But I definitely think there was a change in how the staff operated in terms of our communication, right? Responsibilities, um, how others responded to our staff. So sometimes in sports, there's a sense that if you have a male on staff, you know, he does the X's and O's, right? He's the the guy that you know, is responsible for the strategy. And so when you don't have that guy on staff and we're still going to Final Fours, now there's an understanding that, you know, somebody on the staff as a woman is doing the strategy, right? Somebody on the staff is the X's and O's person. Somebody on the staff is um, the person who's responsible for player development. And so that dynamic, I think, for within the staff, we were very adamant as women that we wanted to make sure that our players and other staffs understood that we were still as good um, from a strategy and a tactical standpoint as we were before. So that is how that dynamic changed within the staff.
Well, I know we only have a few minutes left, so I think we wanted to open it up if anybody had any questions.
Thank you both for being here. What's the difference that you've seen playing professional basketball versus training college students playing basketball? Is there a difference?
There has been a difference over the years. So um, when I trained to be a pro, there was less trainers. So I trained by going to the Y and playing against dudes, right? That's how I got, you know, better. And now this generation, because I didn't grow up with a professional, there was no WNBA. So I didn't grow up thinking I want to be a pro. But this generation, they have grown up now. All they know is there's the opportunity to be a professional basketball player. So they have grown up with trainers and dads. It's always the dads. And the dads taking them to the gym to work on their game because they have this aspiration. So now when we get them in the gym, they have this desire to be great that we can tap into that didn't necessarily exist 20 years ago or 25 years ago. You know, it was just, I want to be the best I can be, but being able to tap into that now, we're able to push them a little bit harder, where they invest more in their own development, right? So because they want to be a pro, they spend more time in the gym. They spend more time working on their game outside of practice. They're more receptive to these are the things that you need to do because they have this desire they want to be on draft day and hold up the jersey. So there's a lot more commitment, I think, to being the best that they can be.
What is it that we can do for that younger generation, several of you have kids, what are your recommendations?
Get them in sports. I think that's actually, I say that to everyone I speak to. If you have a daughter, put her in sports. It's one of the, if not the biggest predictor of confidence in women, and positive feelings about their bodies. So yeah, it doesn't have to be crazy competitive, but like after school, running team, rec league, sports.
And I would also say we have to, as women, we have to support women's professional sports. So, buy the WNBA League Pass, even if you don't watch it, right? Just it's, $35 for the season. Just buy it. The more that we can support the professional leagues and the colleges, but the more we support these teams, then as we grow in our ownership, but the powers that be will see the value, the real time value of women's sports. And so the more that we can support these leagues financially, go to the games, be a season ticket holder. If you have the resource to do that, that is really, really impactful.
Another thing on that point that's so easy and won't cost you a thing is today, before you leave, follow one women athlete on social media. Like, especially in this NIL landscape, the amount of social followers you have really matters to a woman's earning potential. So follow them.
So completely enjoyed this wonderful dialogue that we had. Thank you so much. You're hugely successful women. I would be interested in knowing who are your biggest advocates as you were growing up, and who has, who has been your champions now.
That's great. Okay, I'll go first. My grandmother, definitely. She was a woman growing up in a time where women were not allowed to be ambitious. But she was incredibly ambitious about everything that she did. And I think she really passed that trait on to me, and really helped me understand there's more than one way for ambition to look. And then, I've had a lot of great mentors in my time. My very first boss, when I was out of college, I was working at a PR firm. She gave me a 13% raise at my first performance review, which I didn't even know what a appropriate raise to ask for was. I Googled it before our meeting. And so something at the time was like, 7% would be like great. And she sat down, she said, I'm going to give you a 13% raise. Is that enough? And now looking back, I'm like, oh my God, I should have asked for 15. But she was really wonderful about making sure I was learning how to advocate for myself at that very formative time in my career.
I would say my mom, and the way that she raised me and my brothers and sisters. But specifically for me, she always talked about and. So you can do this and you can do that and you can do the other. So whatever I thought that I wanted to do, she found a way to make it happen. And that impacted me as a professional because I never thought about, well, I have to pick between being a professional athlete or being a lawyer. My mom was like, you can do both, be a professional athlete and be a lawyer. So that really impacted me. And like Macaela, I've had a number of mentors that have been truly invaluable. But I would have to say Coach McGraw and my best friend and coaching colleague, Carol Owens, they were the ones who I never wanted to coach. I did not see that as something that was something that I could do, wanted to do, had any interest. And they both were like, this is something you should do, you should try it. And they saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And because of that, they've always been very impactful. I wouldn't be down this path if not for those two.